Hi, welcome to AP European History. Again, my name's Paul Sargent, and if you're in my class or if you're in some other classes, you may have some upcoming big time tests. We call them cumulative tests in my class because, well, they're cumulative. They cover pretty much everything we've done up to this point of the year. And in my class, we're getting ready to take the Everything Right Before World War I test. And so I thought today I'd spend a little time and go through some tips for studying for a cumulative test in AP Euro. All of this is designed to get you better prepared, and this isn't by any means a Bible. This doesn't guarantee success, but it just might help. We'll call it the Procrastinator's Guide to Cramming. All right, so there's a few big things that you have to understand. And number one is the big picture of AP Euro. The class and these cumulative tests are not about the really, really specific details. There are specific details on there, but not so much as you find in a daily reading check or quiz or even in a chapter test. Cumulative tests tend to check for broader understanding. And also, it's those major concepts, right? You're not trying to memorize every single fact in the book here. You're just trying to go through and get sort of like the big things. Do you get it? Do you understand? And do these things make some sort of sense? So if that kind of gets you going, if you're interested, if you want more, well, here we go. Here are some tips that just might help you on the next cumulative test that you take. All right, tip number one. What I call historical boxes. The way I look at history, it's a lot like almost boxes on a shelf. And if you could put all of the historical information that you know, all the stuff you've learned during class, you could put them in these different boxes and know what box everything's in, then you're you're in a good shape, because when you're asked a question about something, you kind of know which box to go to. And if the answers that are wrong are not in that box, then you can eliminate them pretty easily. So let me give you an example of some historical boxes that you might want to think about and how this course might be organized. Now, the idea behind this whole thing is that you can categorize anything. I mean, just ask scientists, anything can be categorized, right? But in history, it's easy to categorize either by a time period or by a movement, okay? We can look at a century. It's a nice, easy, sort of convenient, fabricated, man-made kind of way to do things. Or by, movements, historical trends and things like that, which might be easier. The problem with always doing historical trends, though, is that sometimes the test references centuries, so we kind of got to throw ourselves down into that as well. So let's take a brief look at what we've covered so far, okay? Let's start with the 15th and 16th centuries. Now, we started off looking at the Renaissance. This included art, both in Italy and in the North. This included the idea of humanism and the expansion of learning. New monarchies arose that tried to consolidate power. And then there were problems with the church, which foreshadow our second box, the Reformation. Okay? In the Reformation, of course, we have all these Christian sects that pop up: Lutheranism, Calvinism, all the different kinds of Calvinism, and lots of other things. You have a lot of warfare that results from that. And of course, you have a Catholic response, which is basically to say, hey, we were right all along. We did some things that we weren't so proud of, and let's change that, but we're not going to sort of change the way we look at the whole world. We also have exploration. It starts in the 15th and 16th century, and of course pushes further on, but we'll put it here for this sake. These are the voyages of discovery, the colonization of peoples, especially in Latin America, and the creation of a global economy through the triangle trade, the Columbian exchange, and the spice trade that's coming from over in the East Indies. In the 17th century, we have a period of absolutism. And in this period of absolutism, it's characterized by divine right monarchies. It's defined by political wars where divine right monarchs try to prove that they're better than other divine right monarchs. Constitutionalism that arises in places like the Dutch Republic and in England, and the Baroque period in art, which sort of glorifies all of these things. We also have the scientific revolution, which starts with astronomy, moves into physics, medicine, chemistry, a basic understanding of the Newtonian universe and all of that. And of course, that has effects on society and on religion and on what people believe and how people live and all of that. So that's your 17th century box, or boxes, depending on how you want to look at it. The 18th century started off with the Enlightenment. And during the Enlightenment, we talked a lot about the idea of reason and being able to reason things through, like the scientific revolution, then applying those to improve society. So a lot of political treatises, a lot of ideas of right and wrong, a lot of criticism of society, and then a gradual movement towards a questioning of what knowledge really is and what we know and do we exist and stuff like that. It's followed by enlightened absolutism, where you have implementation of some of these ideas, and absolute rulers try and make their absolute rules a little bit more enlightened. And so they put them in there and they try new things, and to varying degrees of success, they all mostly fail. And we don't have a whole lot of enlightened absolutism, just ask the Russians under Catherine the Great. There's, of course, continued warfare throughout the 18th century, largely between England and France, but of course involving lots and lots of other countries. And then proto-industrialization, like the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution, where you have the first big inventions of industry. It hasn't really taken off yet. I'm going to push that into the 19th century just because it's easier. Okay. And then we end the 18th century with the French Revolution. And of course, you start off with the whole idea of the old order, the old social order of the three estates. You roll into the French Revolution, the terror that it devolves into, and then of course the Napoleonic era, which involves lots of warfare and some reforms, and then of course ends with Waterloo. So that's your 18th century. Now again, some of this historians are going to argue about. Some people will put the French Revolution as the beginning of the 19th century. Napoleon's reign was almost completely in the 19th century, but for sake of ease and for sake of the fact that that's how the textbook my class does it, and I think how most textbooks do it, let's leave it here. Okay? 19th century's got enough going on, let's face it. We start off with the Industrial Revolution. We're talking about inventions, we're talking about factories, railroads, iron, coal and steam power, those sorts of things. And a lot of changes in society, in the way people work, in the concept of work, movement of people, and all of that. So that's sort of the Industrial Revolution. And then we have the age of ideologies. This can be subdivided in lots and lots and lots of different ways. People call it the isms, people call it ideologies, people call it all kinds of things. Basically, you need to know conservatism, liberalism, nationalism, romanticism, socialism. And you need to understand that those factors lead to a series of revolutions and two very prominent unifications, those of Germany and Italy. And that's kind of your ideology time here. And then there's the time of consumerism, where you have the idea of mass society, where now people are beginning to have more time and more disposable income, and societies are starting to appeal to the common person. There's a real rise of the middle class here with the Second Industrial Revolution. A mass culture arises, which is more about a culture of domesticity, maybe, and urbanization. You have rise of leisure and professional sports, those sorts of things. Education becomes available and in many cases mandatory at this time. And then, of course, the movement to cities and the effects that has on cities themselves. And finally, imperialism. And I didn't really know how to put this really succinctly, but there's a period where Europe goes out and they practice imperialism in Africa and in Asia. You need to kind of know the effects on not only the colonies, but the colonizers as well, because those are going to foreshadow things to come. And then, of course, the search for peace in Europe, or as I'm teaching it in my class, Bismarck's alliance system. More on that later. All right, and then finally the 20th century. That's World War I. Everything that comes after that, we haven't gotten there yet, so don't worry about that box. So the big idea here with the boxes is if you can put these things into specific little places in your mind, and you're asked a question about a person, and you know what box that person is in, you can eliminate most of the answers on a multiple choice exam. And that's kind of the premise behind this whole system. It's not 100%, and it does force you to know a lot, but that's kind of what we're doing here. All right, tip number 2, use past tests, okay? Go through and look at the tests that you've missed and look specifically at the questions that you didn't get. Now, I always encourage my students to ask themselves this. Why did you miss these questions? Okay, if you really want to analyze this and spend some time, I think you'll probably find that your answers to this question are going to fall into 3 basic answers. Number 1, it's just a lack of knowledge. You didn't know it. And that just means you need to study. Whether it means you need to study that particular thing or whether it means you need to study more generally, you need to study. And you have to understand that there's an infinite number of historical facts out there, but this isn't a trivia question. This isn't Jeopardy. And so there's only there's only a limited number of things that we teachers are going to ask about, especially on a cumulative thing. So you try and look for like recurring themes as you go through these tests, because it's those recurring themes which can be very, very, very important. And so study those, okay? Maybe sometimes you misread the question. You didn't see the not. You didn't see the except. And you circled the wrong thing. Or you guessed the wrong thing. Hey, those are mistakes. And I always tell my students, go through and circle the not, circle the except, circle it 7 times. Make sure you see that is what the question's asking. That way you shouldn't miss it, okay? Or as I like to say to my students, eliminate the answers saying they're wrong because they're right. That's your not or your accept. All right, sometimes you're just stuck between 2 answers. You've eliminated 3, you're stuck between 2, and you guessed the wrong one. Good rule of thumb here, it's not absolute, is just use common sense. What makes the absolute best sense in any case? And if you can answer that, then that should help you along a lot of times. Remember, the wrong answers on these AP tests can be pretty tricky, and they're designed that way. There's a level of difficulty here. But remember, there is a law of absolutes, and the law of absolutes is this. If it says always or never in an answer or in a question, that means always, meaning there's never, ever, ever going to be a situation where this doesn't happen, or never means in every single possible case. And if you can think of one case where it didn't happen, or whether it did, depending on whether it's an always or never, then that's not the answer.